is that darn cardi Jew? They're making us ravenous look horrible.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.
Shalom and welcome again to another exciting edition of the Torah Watchman Show International, hosted by none other, your favorite Hardy Jew, Hakam ben-Emmett. I hope everyone's been well. This is a Torah lecture for this Torah cycle week from Parshah Chukat and Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. A lot of the interesting, exciting things, dialogues, and epic crisis events are represented in this Torah Parsha. Quickly, I want to give you a synopsis. I hope everyone's been well, and I hope you want to learn something new from the Torah, from this Sidra version this year, because you know, we are different than we were the previous year, hopefully. That means the divine content of God's holy word is able to change us quantumly at a subatomic level of our configuration of our Nefesh Yehudi in a way that we would just be amazed if you could just comprehend what I'm saying. We're talking about none other the red heifer, which is a mystery in itself and does not make any logical sense. Why is sacrificing a red heifer, burning it completely to ashes, mixing it with key ingredients, bottling it up in a cistern, and sprinkling its ashes toward tribal Israel, how does that cleanse them of the dreaded plague disease, both infects both the flesh and the soul, of incidental encounterment of corpses? We're going to also talk about the deaths of Miriam, the death of Aaron, respectively. We're going to talk about the fiery serpents. We're going to talk about numerous tribal wars with Canaanites, because we're getting to the end of the story of Moshe's leadership over tribal Israel. He very soon is going to hand over the baton, per se. Literally, he'd give his staff over, his robes, everything else. More importantly, his anointing would be passed from him to none other than Joseph. So they're getting very close to the River Jordan, the east bank. But they had to go through the Midianites, the Moabites, Ammonites there. Of course, the Amalekite threat was always there. And, you had different Canaanites, adversarial forces there too, all in a mixed bag. And then you had giants. Yes, we have a story about giants too. Briefly, we'll get to that. So let's get started in first Aliyah. If you want to turn with me, whether you're a Christian or Jew or not, turn with me to the book of Numbers, chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 1. The meaning of Chukat essentially means statute, and primarily it's in reference to the red heifer Sidra portion that I will get to shortly. It can be found in Numbers 19, chapter 19, verse 2. When you first read the first verse there, you'll see the word, literally, Chukat ha-Torah, literally, statute of the Torah, okay? You could say that the 613 mitzvot are equal weighted statutes as well, okay? So in the first Aliyah, chapter 19, verses 1 through 17, I'm not going to read all the verses. I'm going to give you a brief synopsis, okay? The most severe of all ritual impurities is Tumat met, impurity contracted through the contact with a human corpse. As you know, 3,500 years ago, there were a lot of warring parties. I mean, you had thousands of soldiers and troops, women and children too, massacred in their own communities, massacred in the field, and very, very unfortunate that because of the way it was things culturally then, and just simply that you're out in the desert, the bodies fell where they did. And then you had carrion and other predatory birds that would, I hate to get into the gross aspect of that, the decomposing corpse and everything, would go into the earth, return to the earth. And then how would you know if you walk upon that bloody battlefield? There's a lot of bloody battlefields in the United States, southern United States, from our horrible, horrible Confederate war. So just consider that. Consider what happens when you walk into a cemetery. Think about that. Think about you're walking on the graves, literally the buried bodies, approximately 6 feet underneath the ground. If you're in New Orleans, Louisiana, it's about 6 or 8 feet below sea level. So they actually have the sepulchres built above the ground. Then you have all the issues with the statues of Mother Mary and angels and patron saints, all this. I don't want to get into all that, but that's what I'm talking about. So to the rescue is a red heifer, but not any red heifer. I'm talking about a pure blood, burning red like a hot ice candle, red heifer, not a bull, but a cow, a heifer. Compare that to the golden calf that was a bull created as an object of adultery and pagan worship. The red heifer was not worship, but its materials as key ingredients was used spiritually as a cleansing remedy for tribal Israel when they encountered corpses. That's what it says. Is primarily red heifer is for corpse mitigation. I guess you could say that. Now, when I talk about red heifer, I'm talking about it cannot have so many black hairs in its ear, you know? And these red heifers are actually bred for several years. The breeding stock is at least 10 years old, maybe 8 years, I'm not sure. In Shechem, there's a group of Levites in Shechem, and they actually have a breeding stock there of pure blood, kosher red heifers. But the Israeli government does not like the idea of them sacrificing them and then bringing those ashes before the temple site and then saying a prayer of cleansing that God commanded Israel. The red heifer was well known as far as the sacrificial offering. It was well known, incidentally, on Yom Kippur. However, if there was after a battle, after you get blood on yourself and your hands and everything, I'm not talking about blood from an animal sacrifice. The Kohen Gadol had blood on his ear and his head and everything else because that's part of that ritual. I'm talking about blood from sword warfare, stabbing and cutting weapons and axes, all the horrific things of war and combat. Okay, your clothes are soaked. What do you do? What do you do with that? Well, I'll imagine after every major Israeli war campaign, that red heifer would be sacrificed for that. Okay, and the ashes actually would be put in a cistern, and they will actually be mixed with a hyssop tree. And some sages say there was actually a white thread or something like that, a wool cord that was dyed in crimson red and was all mixed in there with the ashes and everything else, okay? And it was actually stored. So periodically they would need, because of the cleansing ritual was so important, critically important, especially back at tribal Israel, and I think it's equally important today. A lot of people could say that we're unclean. We're unclean just by being human, but you know, it was actually burned completely. None of the meat was eaten, unlike a goat or other animal sacrifice per se. It was burned on a wood and timber from cedars. See a picture here. Of course, cedars is well known. It did not place the world in Lebanon. I'm not sure where they got the cedars from, but you know, cedars can grow in arid climates too. And I believe that God prepared the journey of the tribe of Israel before they even left Goshen, Egypt. He had the water reserves there. He had the date trees there. He had honey, things of this nature. And he had balsam wood trees. The balsam wood was actually used predominantly for building of their tabernacle. Of course, they brought a lot of building materials when they left Goshen. Okay, so we're talking about the red heifer. Its importance. It's very critical back in the day, and I think it's equally important too, because it's only sacrificial offering, animal sacrifice offering, which God mandates. It has to be completed outside of Greater Israel. I mean, outside of Hor Hahar, outside of the temple or Mishkan or tabernacle. It actually in the area where people with Tazarat and leprosy or women with Nadah conditions would be quarantined and isolated. That's where it would be kept. And then when you touch this, even the Levites the only ones allowed to touch the elements and partake in the burning and all of this of that red heifer, they would be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. There was also a final requirement after the ashes were introduced, and the ashes could actually be put on your head or just sprinkled toward you. The ashes, there's dust essentially like this, like something is literally cremated, that the person is to take a bath in mikvah spring water, okay? It's a ritual pool, and of course mikvah pools and earth wells and things of this nature, synagogues are literally built on top of that mikvah. It's one of the first things that's established structurally before a synagogue is complete, okay? The second aliyah, Numbers chapter 19, verse 18 through chapter 20, verse 6. The previous Sidra, the purification process is continued in this group of verses here, along with the admonition that the impure individual not enter the tabernacle or temple until the purification process is completed. So there was, I told you, the 7-day interval. You will not, even though you've gone through the ritual of the red heifer, and even you were pronounced kosher or clean, and you went to the mikvah, pronounced kosher, you have to wait that 7 days, okay? And again, why would someone not a Levite even come near the tabernacle? Well, everyone has a grain offering or an offering of pigeons for Medim or a Thanksgiving offering. This is a regular occurrence, but the Christians is not just because sins, because they were thankful, okay? That's how it went. Those grain offerings, the liberation, all of this, that's what happened. Also in this section is a very tragic event, is that Miriam, the older sister of Moshe, finally passed away. In the Torah, it's a teaching book, and it does not provide the kind of granularity of detail that we would like to have. For instance, all we know that Miriam died in the 40th year of tribal Israel's wandering in the wilderness then, when it was coming to conclusion. It's not a coincidence she died on that 40th year. That means she served a purpose. Just like the manna and the quail served its purpose while in the desert, they would no longer require Miriam's beautiful spiritual talent of finding water in all the places throughout the desert that no one would else to think. There's something called a diving rod, a divining rod, that I've seen in the South, in the southern United States. It actually has something like, I would say, a willow tree, something like that grows along a river. The theory is you have something shaped like a Y, and it goes into a long rod or stick or branch towards you, and you hold the two ends of that Y that converges to a triangle, okay? And you walk along the ground, and you can find supposedly water sources, reserves, and things you would not normally know that was there. My father actually used it because his father taught him to use it to find leaky PVC water pipes. I remember that, and I remember using it before. And maybe it's my imagination, but it actually felt like it was something was pulling on it, like gravity or something like that. Large basins of water inside the Earth's crust does change the Earth's magnetic field, to some respect. Maybe it has something in the science, or maybe it's pseudoscience. Who knows? But that's just what this section reminds me of that about Miriam. She did not have any devices. She didn't have any special tools. She definitely did not have a bobcat or a bulldozer or a drill to find that water. She literally had a rock that followed her, per se, according to sages in the stories and Midrash and the Talmud. Essentially says a rock was manifested on behalf of an angelic being, a Moloch. Every time Miriam called for water, she would look at a rock. It would happen to be next to a large rock. There's a lot of rocks out in the desert, but this was a predominant rock. And then she just speak to the rock, and then water would come out. And the Jewish people appreciated her so much for the water giver. Maybe she's born in the month of Aquarius, I don't know. But she found that water and that water reserve and everything else when they were so thirsty, and the animals needed to drink too, and everything else. Incidentally, and some Jewish homes, including mine, because I equalize women and men there at the Pesach table, we have a vase to Eliyahu, and we have a vase for Miriam. Eliyahu has wine or grape juice. Miriam has a glass of water. I think about Miriam every time we have Pesach. We should think about her more, because there's only one sentence that says, it's like an afterthought, and Miriam died in the 40th year of the wandering in the wilderness then. Interestingly, since the Torah does not include anything within its annals, its pages, the scroll parchments, unless generationally significant for us to live by today. I mean, just for us to know that Miriam passed away, not knowing how she died, not knowing how many people came to her wake or her sitting Shiva, that's not really that important, right? Well, the thing is that women do Shiva differently than men, and it's not predominantly mentioned like men. It's just the way it is, as is Jewish tradition, okay? Women prepare a corpse, a body differently for its interment, final interment there, than men do, as far as just washing and dress and redressing and clothes and things of this nature. I just want to say that Miriam Bat Levi was a wonderful person. She committed one sin that was recorded in 5 books of the Torah. I tell you, I wish I could be that lucky and say there was only one sin held to my account in documentation and witnesses that I committed, and all those pages, those delicious pages of the Torah. Of course, that sin was none other than gossiping about the marital relationship of Moshe's second wife. We don't know who she was. I did a separate video on this. Please check that out. But she said she was a Cushionite. In other words, she probably from, Cush is literally, from the sons of Noach, Cush and Ham, and it's probably Ethiopian. Okay, so an Ethiopian lady. There's nothing says there about them having children or anything else. All that, as far as I know, Moshe only had 2 sons through Zipporah, his first wife. And incidentally, it does not say when or how Zipporah died. At some point, Moshe had a need to marry someone else. People need human comfort. Even King David wanted a comfort of a young girl. There's nothing sexual about it. People get in their 80s or whatever, and they cannot stay warm in the bed. And then his wife, Bathsheba, was a queen, and she was ruling on his stead because she's probably much younger than him. He was very sickly in the bed, and he had a young virgin in bed with him, keeping him warm. I don't know if this is the issue for Moshe, but again, people need a human comfort. Problem is here, it's not just Miriam, but it's Aaron, her brother too. For gossip to occur, it's not just one person speaking. As another person listening, right? So Aaron had at each ear listening, like the image here of Aaron, of Miriam whispering into his ear, and he's saying, what do you think about this Cushionite woman that our brother married? I noticed that he doesn't sleep in her tent. Why did he get married again? Why did he just live out his life as a widower? He has all his life is given and sacrificed to God anyway. He didn't spend a lot of time with Zipporah in the last years of her life either. So one thing led to another, and the sisterhood knew what the concerns or gripe and complaints, I don't know what it was, and it doesn't go into a lot of detail, except she was wrong. It was an evil thing for her to do because it was just hearsay. She did not have the facts, and folks, it is akin to Lashon Hara, which is not in Torah, but is more tale-bearing, as I call it, a form of gossip and spreading malicious messaging that's always negative about another person without having witnesses to back what you're saying in a formal accusation that will go before judges, a court, or Sanhedrin, okay? So what happened, what happened with this sin here, and this is the previous Parshah, by the way, it's not in here, it simply says she died quickly, is that she contracted a Tazarat leprosy kind of condition where she turned completely white as snow. And then Aaron just weeping and falling to the ground, begging God, begging Moshe, please, she is so much pain, so much discomfort. Please forgive me for listening to her. Aaron should have told her, stand down. Let's not talk about her brother-in-law. You know what happened in the Korach rebellion? Don't say anything bad about him. God holds his back, even when Moshe is wrong. But anyway, his begging and prayers is that God essentially told Moses is, okay, Miriam is in quarantine now. Regular quarantine procedures or Tazarat should apply, but she will be cured and relieved of leprosy. Leprosy was an incurable bacterial-like disease back in that time. And also, they had leper colonies in the Middle Ages, too. So they both repented of that. What's interesting, even though no one is not recorded in the Torah, and I'm sure that Moshe and Aaron did privately mourn their sister in their own way, and it was a very private, very close-knit, intimate family unit there, the spoke there, and probably it was a lot of, you think about everything else, what happened in your lives, what you could have said, what you should have done. Maybe there was some resentment. I don't know. You have a big guilty conscience when you know you didn't do everything or say everything that you should have when that person alive and then suddenly die and they're taken away from you. That's how the Jewish Hebrew people were during that time, because all the wells that Miriam was managing for critical resources in that dry, hot desert there, they dried up. Every single well that Miriam found and discovered and was functional and operational when she was alive, literally the blood and life force in her Nefesh Yehudi was supplying the energy and the force of that water coming out from the ground and then going out and being able for people to drink from it and feed hundreds, if not thousands, of livestock as well. Of course, water was needed for mikvah too, and for temple sacrifices, very, very critical resource. But all the water dried up. And then the men, I would say, I'll pick on the men, who should have set Shiva for Miriam, who took her for granted for probably most of her life there, as a queenly kind of person, I would imagine. Being a sister of Moshe had his reputation there, and she was head of the sisterhood. I would imagine they had their own social niche there, and then they probably remembered what they should have said. And then they were faced with a life and death crisis in the desert in the water. And one thing led to another, okay? So in the third Aliyah, Numbers chapter 20, verse 7 through 13, Yehovah tells Moshe and Aaron to take a staff and gather the people in front of a certain rock. This is the English translation. And Rashi and other people don't get into this, but they said this rock is the same rock that appeared when Miriam needed to call upon the Lord her God for water. That rock appeared every time she called, and she spoke to it. No one hit it. No one cursed it and said, if you don't give me water, rock, I'll never talk to you again. Nothing like that happened, all kidding aside. But I'm just saying is that God told Moshe and Aaron, come to this rock over here, and you will find the water supply that Miriam used to provide for the Hebrew people. So they did. But what's happening is that there was a huge crowd, huge ruckus, people complaining, saying, you've led us to an evil land, we're going to die of thirst, it's better we stayed in Egypt, you've heard it. We can't stand this manna and quail. We're sick of it. We want spicy food and dairy products and dates and figs and everything else. Just griping and complaining and bellyaching to the point that the Moshe said, I just had enough of these people. And out of anger, I believe. He doesn't say it. But God ordered him to speak to the rock. Instead, Moshe and Aaron gathered before everyone, that huge national, about 2 million people, gathered around this one boulder, imagine, is very predominant, because they expected a miracle to happen. And when this happened, Moshe committed a grave error. Instead of speaking to the rock, he hit it twice with that staff, the same staff, divine staff, that was used to destroy the Egyptian army, the Pharaoh, the 10 plagues, and then split apart the Red Sea into two halves. And what Jehovah said to Moshe and Aaron, since they were both instigators in this.
No evidence in the Torah that Aaron even attempted to convince Moshe to not strike the rock, but speak to the rock simply as his sister of beloved memory had done in her time. In essence, they were both conspirators to the same sin of anger as emissaries before God, before the children of Israel.
So the fourth aliyah, Numbers chapter 20, verses 14 to 21, Moshe sends messengers to the king of Edom. Edom, yes, the descendants of Esau, essentially the king of Edom, had daughters in which Esau had married. Esau was quite a woman's man, a womanizer. In fact, he actually stole the wives of other men for himself, and he married daughters of Ishmael too. But he actually moved into the area of Edom, and his DNA and genetics ancestry was conjoined with the Edomites, the native people, Canaanite peoples that were there at the time. Moshe sent messengers or ambassadors, Elazar, to the king of Edom. He said, please allow us to pass through your land, and which is south of Canaan, actually. We're trying to find a path, a logistical path that is free from adversarial forces. Of course, they need a place for their sheep to graze, and they need a place for water, right? So they wanted to go to the promised land, but the king of Edom said no. So Edom refuses the Jewish passage. This was anti-Semitism, of course. And of course, Esau, there's a curse of Esau, and it was prophesied that they would be at odds for all generations, right? Right? So, despite Moses' promises not to harm anyone, not to harm the land, not to clean, he promised, I'll clean up all my garbage. I will make things better when we go through. We have the anointing of God. They refused. And of course, God at that time told them not to war against Edom. Why? Because of promises made to Esau and his descendants, just like the same promises made to Abraham and his descendants. Okay? So what happened? The Yehudim were forced to circumvent the land of Edom and approach Canaan from the east. So more wandering, going up and down, trying to find a path. Fifth aliyah, Numbers chapter 20, verse 22, verses chapter 21:9, the Jews arrive at Mount Hor. Mount Hor, none other, is close to Petra in Jordan, okay? I'll show you a picture of this mountainous region, quite desolate. So at Jehovah's command, Moshe and Aaron's son Elazar, next in line to be Kohen Gadol, of course, the son of Aaron, I believe the third son of all, in order there, Elazar, to go up to the mountain's peak, okay? So Aaron removes the high priest vestments, his high priest vestments, and then dons them on Elazar, his son, okay? Aaron knew that the reason why he's called to this mountain, because God had told Moshe, it's time for Aaron to end his journey. He was going to die, and he would be gathered up to his forefathers, okay? So the entire nation mourns when they learn that after Aaron was disrobed of all his priestly garments, and I'll show you an image here of Kohen Gadol to remind you how beautiful and complex, and the 12 diadems of stones and precious stones and emeralds and sapphires and things that was on the chest plate and everything else. it's like this kept him alive, kept him young, kept him free from disease. And when I was removed, well, the old man expired. And that's what happened. This time, when tribal Israel found out that Aaron did not come down from the mountain with Elazar, and so Elazar as a Kohen Gadol dressed in his father's garments and wardrobe, they mourned for 30 days. This is Jewish tradition, folks. The first week is a hard sitting Shiva, literally. No work, no whatsoever. Very few baths. It's like Yom Kippur, just freshen up the thing, kind of thing. Some people tear their clothes. They read prayers of Kaddish. They read from the Psalms and things like that. They have men that come in for men from family members of a man that's passed away, and you have women that do the same thing, predominantly for a woman that passes away from the family. It's really bad in the first 7 days. It eases up in 30 days. The 30 days is the marker, departure of the Nefesh Yehudi from this earthbound plane, per se, hopefully to Sheol, okay? But that tradition is honored today based on the 30 days in which is documented in the Bamidbar, in which the Jews mourned for Aaron. They did not mourn for Miriam. Interesting note here, okay? So the Jews, therefore, were forced to deal with the situation. They were emotionally traumatized. They had a senior leader that they always known, especially the last 40 years, one in the desert. A lot of conflicts with Korah and everything else. But they were psychologically wounded by this. And what happened, adversarial forces heard about this, saw the mourning, crying, or the change of dress and everything else, because you do change your clothes for that ritual of mourning, for Kaddish. The Amalekites took advantage of the situation. You remember when God says, there shall be a generational curse for eternity against Amalek? Well, Amalekites are disguised as Canaanites. And I guess Canaanites, they had their banner, they had their kind of shield and buckler. They resembled Canaanites. They probably killed some Canaanites and then dressed in their clothes and then pretended to be Canaanites or one of the local tribes there to attack the Jews. Now the Jews prayed to Jehovah and were victorious to battle. So they just got over a period of mourning. They won the victory because they prayed and maybe asked for forgiveness. Now, soon after that victory occurred, what happens? Well, the Jews complain again about their food, claiming that they are disgusted with the manna. The manna was a multi-purpose food, a vitamin supply, something you could repurpose to almost any kind of grain product imaginable, okay? It kept them alive. It gave them substance. And, you know, and during Sabbath especially, we pray for Lechem Haaretz, you know, the bread of the earth, and the manna served as a showbread and everything else they needed for their grain requirement for offering. But they despised it, okay? They were disgusted with it because they're thinking about their life or past life or their ancestors, you know, that died in that desert for 40 years, you know, although how sweet and delicious that land of bitter slavery was for them. You try to figure this out. What happened is that Jehovah dispatches serpents, fiery serpents, or venomous vipers, maybe cobras, king cobra, I don't know. You've seen Indiana Jones, you know, the image like this is very funny. He did not like snakes very much. And a lot of venomous snakes are in Egypt, all kidding aside. But, you know, why didn't these snakes pester Israel, tribe of Israel, in that 40 years? Why? Because God protected them. He kept away the scorpion, kept away the poisonous insects, kept away all these maladies of the land, all the animal life and everything else, especially the venomous snakes. But the snakes were released. The adversary or Satan released them, and they were biting with poison in their fangs, and many Jews died at this time. Now, what Moses prays to Jehovah, and he's seen his people dying, maybe distant relations dying, and it was all this death and everything else around them was too much for Moshe. And he begged Jehovah to relent. So God says, create a symbol of their pain, create a symbol of their suffering. take a copper pole, and then forge a snake that's entwining up and down that pole and mount it in the ground high enough on a high place so that all the Jews, if they looked upon that serpent, if that snake was biting them right there, they weren't already dead, they would be revived, they would be healed, and nothing, the casualties would greatly diminish because of that, okay? So the bitten Jews would look at the snake and be healed. I want to point out something that a lot of people may not know, but there's a correlation to medical and health professionals today. What am I talking about? There's a word by the name of caduceus, maybe I'm not pronouncing it correctly, is a medical symbol that depicts two snakes coiled around a staff and is often winged, okay? It is the official insignia of the United States Medical Corps, Navy Pharmacy Division, and the Public Health Service, and is also frequently used as a crest by healthcare companies and their pharmaceutical entities. However, something known as a aduceus, which is Greek, is a symbol with a short staff entwined by two serpents. It has more outstretched wings per se. It's from a Greek myth or legend or god or something, and sometimes surrounded by wings. This rod of Asclepius is one of a single snake. Both symbols originate from this Torah Sidra. So they have different names, different tailoring and customization of the symbol. They even have a sticker of most doctors on the car that, doctors get good parking, right? And of course, most symbols on hospitals and emergency room, you see that symbol there. Folks, this comes from the Torah. Isn't it amazing? From the story of the fire serpent and that copper pole that Moshe raised up in the air with that coiled serpent around there, that if people looked at that, their pain and misery of dying to that venomous poison in their veins would be removed from them. Okay, the sixth aliyah, Numbers chapter 21, verses 10 through 20, the Jews journey on, okay? Making their way toward the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And I have maps here to give you some context here. Encrypted in this Sidra is a great miracle which occurred when the Jews passed through Ammon Valley, okay? I'll show you the regions of Ammon, Edom, and Moab, and Midian in this map here, okay? Tall cliffs rose from both sides of the narrow valley. So what you think the tactical advantage is if you were an archer, you would be up in the cliff on the mountainous region there, hiding in a crevice per se. It reminds me of the Qumran caves area along the Dead Sea. They could hide there. When you're in combat, and if you have an elevated position, you have the tactical advantage against the forces down in the valley. And this is what's happening. So what was going on at that time, hiding among the cliffs, were none other than Amorites. Sometimes it's spelled with an A. It's still Amorites. Guerrilla forces were attacking viciously the Jewish people there with the arrows and spears and everything else. Okay, so the Sidra ends with a song of praise for the well which sustained the Jews throughout the desert. And those now blooded waters, the waters became so bloody. The angel of the Lord, their God, came to their rescue. Recently, there was an assassination attempt against President Trump. The bullet just breezed his ear. A couple of millimeters over, he would be dead. And you think about miracles like this. So despite the tactical advantage of the Amorites, their arrows and spears or whatever rocks where they were throwing down, just bounced off the Jewish people like they had invisible force shield. The angels were protecting them. God's anointed people. All God asks you is that when you sin, seek a cleansing ritual, animal sacrifice, get on your knees and ask for forgiveness, and be nice to your fellow Jew. That's all God asks. And there's several, if you read in this Torah Parsha, there's several sections there with a song of praise for each event. The Jews were getting a point of humility, people dying, fire serpents, the loss of Miriam and water supply, all of this. And then the defeat of these insurmountable Canaanite forces, citadels, guarding other kings that there was before them, they finally realized that God was the promise keeper that he always said he was. The seventh aliyah, Numbers chapter 21, verse 21, through chapter 22, verse 1, the Jews approached the land of the Amorites finally. So they went through the guards, they're hidden in the mountainous crevices, defeated them to the point where the Jordan River was red with their blood. Okay, imagine whatever happened, they fell out of the cliffs and fell to the ground, something like that. But as they were approaching the kingdom of the king of the Amorites, Moshe dispatched another messenger to Sachan, the king of the Amorites, asking permission to pass through his land on the route to Canaan. Sachan refuses and instead masses his armies and attacks the Jews, even though his guerrilla elite forces were roundly defeated. So the Jews are victorious and occupy the Ammonite lands by defeating these armies. Again, all the Jew would have to do, all Joshua and Caleb would have to do is raise that sword, have that shield, and then God would supernaturally transform their battle regiment, which is very inferior numbers compared to the other armies that they were massing against them, and God would do the rest. Just like the miracle of Hezekiah on Passover, when God destroyed 180,000 Assyrian soldiers overnight. The same kind of thing, I believe, happened in 1967 in Israel's war during that time, okay? So they occupied the cities, they occupied the communities, they buried the dead, and then they encountered none other than the infamous giant Og, king of Bashan, who led the final attack against the Jewish people. There's a lot of verses here scattered throughout the Jewish Bible about this individual. His stature was actually larger than Goliath, is believed to. I'll show you a picture of his bed here. He had to have a small army just to move his bed. It was so massive. This was a huge giant. And of course, we believe that he was a descendant of the Nephilim from the flood. Maybe some of them escaped to the very highest mountains and survived until the floodwaters had dwindled. Who knows? But whatever created the giants back in the book of Bereshit in time of Noah, well, there were giants in land here in Canaan. We have giants too, and it's an unhealthy condition. Maybe you can play good basketball, but your back and knees give out and they don't live very long. It's like a birth deformity or something. When you're that tall, it's very difficult. But the king of Og was wiped out as well. People in Jericho on the other side of the River Jordan was hearing about all these kings, all their armies decimated by once slaves of Egypt that was moving through their ancestral homeland. Okay? The Jews were triumphed. They killed Og and occupied his castle and his kingdom. And the Jewish nation had reached the bank of the Jordan River just across the city of Jericho in the land of Israel. You can continue reading about this adventure here in the books of Joshua. Okay? This ends this Torah Parsha. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, the Haftarah, I'm not going to read the verses, but the interesting story here is in the book of Judges, chapter 11, verses 1 through 33. The story of an individual, a misfit, essentially, Uriah, is found in the book of Judges. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is far in the future, after Joshua passed away, and after they had dominated land of Canaan. They forsake the Lord and did not serve him. Instead, they served the pagan idols and gods of the Canaanite. So the anger of the Lord their God, Jehovah, was kindled against Israel, used the hand of the Philistines as the adversary force against them to humble them. The Ammonites are spoken predominantly here as well, the same groups of Canaanite tribal people that Moshe had roundly defeated in his time when he was alive. Now, who was Uriah? Well, he was born of a concubine, a non-Jewish woman. However, he had a Jewish ancestry, but because he was born of some other mother than his brothers, or I guess stepbrothers, whatever, he was considered an outcast. He said, "You won't get our father's estate. Get out of here." And was just treated like Pinchas, essentially, a lot. I won't go into that. We're going to hear about him in the next few parshas. But essentially, God made him judge. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord was upon Uriah to defeat these Canaanite tribes." Now, although he's driven out by his half-brothers in the land of Tob, east of Gilead, outlaws collected around Uriah and went raiding parties with him. So some people liked him, and a lot of people identified their own life experiences. We were outlaws too. We were cast out and treated, I was not born of a Jewish mother or whatever. Just think about that, okay? So they worked, every person, every army that joined with Uriah, which was actually God appointed as a judge before his life had ended, they were blessed. The same Spirit was upon Uriah, was upon the armies, and they were successful. Now, Uriah succeeds in defeating Ammon and supplants them, pushes them back, demilitarizes them essentially, okay? And his people, even the people that told him to get out of his community and they were criticized him and everything else, they appointed him as their chieftain. Now, on behalf of Israel as a whole, the reliance and the might of God, the ultimate judge, Uriah challenges the Ammonites. Uriah swears an oath in the middle of that bloody battle. He said, "If you get me through this, the Lord my God, the first thing that comes out of my home when I return back, I will offer up to you as a burnt offering." None other than his virgin daughter, who was running out, Tati, 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 Abba, 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 I'm so happy to see you. And then he started mourning and said, "Oh my God," and started crying and dropped to the ground and weeping because he knew that he made a vow to God and knew God was real in his life. And that was the other end of the contract. He spoke wrongly and spoke out, and maybe an ego, I don't know. He was not raised in the Torah and probably was not someone who was considered a perfect gentleman, but he was a warrior. And that's why God chose him, because no one else would stand up to the Ammonites, okay? But what happened is that his young virgin daughter asked, it said, "Father, I understand, I agree with you. I remember the sacrifice of Isaac that was not sacrificed. Let me go to the hills and dance with my friends and sisters and relations and say goodbye to them." What I think happened is that God never, ever, ever allows a human sacrifice for any reason. And remember, a righteous person cannot die for a sinner. That's said very clearly. And if Uriah was that sinner, his daughter, who was innocent before the Lord, could have not died for his sin. So what probably happened is that she probably died or passed away in her sleep one night when she was with her friends. And it does not say this, but understand it's inconsistent to include that, Uriah built an altar and tied his virgin daughter upon that wood, just like Abraham did with Isaac, and rolled a knife to stab her and burn her up. I don't think it happened. I really don't. I just wanted to add my 2 cents there. Okay? You can read the Talmud and the imaginations of the rabbinites there, and if they may have other ideas in the Midrash too. I hope you enjoyed this Torah Parshah Chukat. It's a lot of interesting things, I think. A lot of 50 Shades of Gray. Humanity and the issues they had 3,500 years ago is not too unlike the things in human relationship we did with here. Try to apply the lesson that God tried to teach the Jewish people, and they did not accept it very much, and they got their hand burned over and over again, because Moses said, "This is a hot stove, stop burning your hand." Well, after their forefathers died and fell into the ruin and desolation of the wilderness of Zin, they still were committing the same sin. Why? Because we need God, folks. God could have made the wilderness of Zin a paradise like Eden, but he didn't. He wanted the Jewish people to be on their faces praying all the time, asking for forgiveness where manna was falling from heaven and quail came in for them for meat. And Miriam had the water and everything else. But Israel is still going through those birth pains as we speak today. I wish the IDF would take an Ark of the Covenant, the Temple Institute. I've told some of them this before. Take a Torah scroll that's anointed by all the chief rabbis, the Hakam there in Israel, and take that Ark of the Covenant before them in every battle with Hamas or Hezbollah. Try it, okay? And why are we not sacrificing a purebred red heifer and Shechem today when it's the only sacrifice that you commanded should be completed outside of the temple area of Israel? Just think about this. Anyway, remember my motto is share the knowledge and wealth and love and truth of everyone willing to hear it. If they're not willing to hear it, maybe there's a message problem between what they see in your life versus the message you're trying to tell them. Maybe think you suffer from ivory tower syndrome. I don't know. But live that Torah truth. That means you are humbled more than the person you're trying to teach. If they see fruit on that vine of that Torah living in your nefesh, Yehudi, in your soul, whether you're a b'nai Noach, or you're a righteous Christian, whoever, do not be a hypocrite. Teach them that truth by living the truth, okay? And then they will probably come to you, more than likely, than just preaching to them. I'm a lighthouse on the hill that will not be hid. I am the white elephant in the room out of the inconvenient truth, and I'm definitely never woke. I shoot from the hip, and I'll tell you nothing but the Emmett truth, if it's ever humanly possible. So help me God. Well, shalom alaikum. Hakam Ya'ar ben-Emmett, signing out until the next time. Take care of yourself. Be good to your fellow Jew, your fellow neighbors. Smile at people. They may just smile back at you, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. There's a lot of issues going on in Israel today, and we need to be thinking about them. The war and everything else, and all the conflict and division in our own country, the United States of America, we need prayer. And that should be humbling, right? Take care.
Yisayinai il harim meyayin yahavo Azri meim Adonai Ose shamayim v'ha'aretz El yotem l'mot ragleach El yonum shomreach Hine alaknum v'lo yishan Shomer Yisrael